Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hug for everyone supporting anyone going through the tween and teen years. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you'll know that I'm always on the lookout for positive, growth-oriented strategies for both us, parents, and for our kids. So when I saw applied neuroscientist, brain health and neuroinclusion specialist Naomi Glover use the term strengths-based parenting, I instantly wanted to know more, because I've discovered that one of the very best things we can do as a parent is to point out to our kids what they do well and focus in on that, rather than endlessly criticizing them for what they're missing. This is particularly true of neurodivergent kids and adults, but it's for everybody. In this episode, we'll unpack what we mean by strengths-based parenting, how we do it, also key tips about our own brain health and why burnout isn't a personal failing. Thanks for joining us, Naomi.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
So, first of all, the thing that attracted me to your work was strengths-based parenting. How can you explain what we know about strengths-based focuses?
Yeah, I think the really interesting stuff about focusing on strengths, well, there's a few things, but one of the things is that we hear so many negative things throughout our childhood and as adults as well. And in particular, you mentioned it's particularly good for neurodivergent people. Absolutely true. And that's because neurodivergent people tend to hear even more negative things than other people because they get things wrong, they forget things, they're not behaving in the classroom. That's the expected behaviours are different. And our cultures and our schools haven't really caught up with that yet. So people hear a lot of negative things, and so they end up believing an awful lot of negative things about themselves. And so often what we hear is people think that they're lazy or they're rubbish or they're forgetful or they're hopeless or they're not very clever. These are the things that we hear over and over again. And it just breaks my heart because all they've heard is the negatives. And so it sets them up for a lifetime of feeling anxious and lacking confidence. That can be changed so easily if we take more of a strengths-based approach. So if people instead understand what their own strengths are and start being recognised for those strengths, it can be a complete turnaround. And I remember yesterday I was hearing you talk about curiosity. So I would love to kind of dive into curiosity a little bit as one of those strengths.
Well, I think curiosity is the thing that keeps us engaged with the kid, doesn't it?
So I think curiosity is really interesting because, but partly for me, because we know more about how it works in the brain, but it's also one of those 24 character strengths that was identified back here about 30 years ago, I think, by Martin Seligman and his brilliant scientists at the University of Pennsylvania. And they identified these 24 character strengths, and there's a questionnaire that you can do that helps you identify what your top strengths are, what are the ones that you use the most, what are the ones you use the least. And some of those strengths are things like curiosity and kindness, and other things are things like perseverance or teamwork. And I sent you a link, so if anybody wants to have a go, they can try it with their children as well. But curiosity, I think, is a particularly useful one because it's one of the strengths that is most associated with a life of well-being, of feeling better about yourself and lifetime satisfaction and better health and actually better longevity as well. So you live healthier, better, longer, have a better quality of life. And one of the things that we know about curiosity is that it can reduce that sense of blame and stigma that often crop up. So, for example, if you're speaking to a child or to a peer or somebody at work, and you say, I can't believe you didn't do that. That's dreadful. There's a sort of a sense of blame. Who's responsible for doing this? What happened there? Instead of this curiosity about, oh, okay, That's interesting. So I noticed that this has happened. Tell me more about that. What could we have done
I
differently
love
next time?
that.
What could we do differently in the future to make sure that doesn't happen? And so it means that not only do you feel less a sense of blame, so you can make a more psychologically safe environment at home or at work or anywhere. Um, but when you get curious and you ask, then you start asking better questions. And when you ask better questions, you get better answers. So if you start asking yourself things like, oh, why am I so rubbish? Your brain will absolutely come up with a million reasons as to why you're so rubbish. Your brain is really good at answering questions. So I think one of the things about curiosity is not just about being curious, but trying to ask yourself better questions. So it's things like, what made that happen in that way? What would I like it to have been? How could I change things in the future to make it work more the way that I would like? And so you're asking yourself better questions.
Love those
And so you
questions.
start getting better answers.
And the piece that you're referring to was where I was saying that when your child does something and you're prompted to go, instead just go, oh. And I love that
Yes.
word you used, noticed. I noticed, because where with my kids, I have found that just if I say, oh, I've noticed, then it's a much less packed, loaded word, isn't it?
Absolutely. So in our household, yeah, we've got a very neurodivergent household. I have ADHD. I didn't find out till I was 45. And I kind of look back and go, how did it take me so long to realize? But at the same time, my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia, dyscalculia when she was at school. And then she didn't get her diagnosis of ADHD until she was 18. And my son, now age 17, also has a diagnosis of ADHD. And my poor husband, who doesn't have ADHD, but does have dyslexia and dyscalculia. And we recognize that everybody's brain is working differently and everybody's good at different things. But when people, particularly with ADHD, I don't know how much you've talked about RSD on your podcast, rejection
I've
sensitive
mentioned I have talked,
dysphoria.
yes, I have, but we can't talk about it enough, to be honest with you, because I think I do actually have listeners who are struggling with kids who are really angry and in a lot of pain. And let's talk about this.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. Emotional dysregulation still isn't recognized as part of the diagnosis for ADHD. And RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, is something which is really common in people with ADHD, but also is common with other neurotypes. And with people who've experienced a lot of bullying in the past as well. And what it means is that when somebody feels a sense of being rejected or told off, or that they've done something wrong, they feel it much more strongly than most people. And they feel it often really quite physically. So they feel it as a physical gut punch. It's painful. It's physically painful. And we see on brain scans now that the emotional hurt that people get from feeling rejected lights up the same part of the brain where we feel physical pain. So there is a really big overlap between that sort of emotional pain and physical pain. It's not something to be easily dismissed. It's genuinely painful for people. And so when they're experiencing this over and over and over again, of course they want to avoid doing things, because the idea of doing something wrong is so awful and so painful, they'd rather not do anything at all. So they'll,
Yes.
what we get then is a lot of this avoidance kind of behavior. Do you want to come and do this? No, I don't want to do that. The demand, that kind of demand avoidant behavior, which people are increasingly struggling with. I think we don't have enough research on it, but I'm really getting the sense that a lot of it is down to this same RSD thing.
My neurodivergent daughter was extremely argumentative about anything, very emotionally reactive. And I think this is a really important thing that we need to talk about, because both with her and with the research I did for my episode on how to create rules and consequences that work, what I discovered was that the way you get rules and consequences that work, it's by connecting with them, asking curious questions, making them understand that you're not trying to make them do things, that you're actually trying to understand them better. And once they understand that you're on their side and that you're only trying to achieve goals that align with what they want to do, you can achieve pretty much anything. And I found it extraordinary. And once I clicked, um, everything started to change at home and in school for my daughter. So at the age of 16, everything was going wrong for her, for all sorts of reasons, but many of the reasons you talk about. And I realized I needed to be much more involved and engaged in promoting the positive. And it doesn't happen overnight. So the thing I worry about with parents is they try something and they go, oh, it doesn't work. She's not listening. And you have to be consistent with this. So I learned to focus on the skills and the things that she was doing really, really well. And once they feel seen and recognized, they start to open up. They relax. They're like, oh, okay. And then they're much more likely to listen to what we say, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really fortunate because one of the things that I did before I had children, I was super interested in self-development anyway, because I'd had such awful anxiety and panic attacks and things as a teen and young adult. It was just awful. Absolutely so debilitating. And so I'd spent a lot of time trying to work out, well, what can I do? How can I help myself to feel better? Well, there must be something out there. And a doctor had said to me something about cognitive behavioral strategies. And for a number of reasons, I wasn't able to see a cognitive behavioral therapist. I couldn't access that, not least because I couldn't leave the house because of the anxieties. But I thought, well, if that's a thing, and if there's something that can help, and it's called cognitive behavioral therapy or
Yes.
cognitive behavioral strategies, I'm going to learn about that. And then if they can do it, I can learn what it is, and then I can learn how to use that. I was always quite curious. I thought, oh, well, I'll just learn how to do that then. So I got some books and I learned about that, and I found that was really helpful. And I started gradually being able to reduce my own anxieties about things. And then I was increasingly interested in how can this help other people. So I ended up training as a coach in 2003, before most people had, looked at what coaching was, in the UK at least.
Yes, I remember that being a thing, yeah.
Yeah. And so I trained as a coach before I had kids. And so when I had kids, I was already in this mode of asking questions rather than telling people what to do. And I suppose I sort of naturally, I hated being told what to do as a kid. So I thought, well, perhaps I'll just try using this coaching type technique, which I coincidentally had already trained in. And that's just the way I always parented my kids. And so all the way through, I would ask them questions. If they were struggling with something, what's the problem? What could we do about it? How could I help? Is there anything you need help with? What could you do? And so it was always very question based. And I was trying to work out when I realized that they both had ADHD, and my daughter in particular, the RSD as well. I was trying to work out why we hadn't had such massive flare-ups as so many of the people that I worked with. And I think that it's just because I was really lucky that coincidentally I had trained as a coach. And so I wasn't telling them what to do. So we didn't have that initial, do this, I don't want to, you can't make me. Those sorts of conversations just didn't happen because I was not giving them anything to fight against.
Well, yes. And I was coaching parents of kids between 3 and 13 in inner city London. And that's one of the things that I focus on. Doesn't mean that you do it very well at home. So I knew how to talk to kids so that they listened and listened so that they would talk to me. I think that for all parents, it's a journey. So I just want to say to parents, that one of the things that we can do is just start practicing these core skills, and they then blossom, and asking questions and listening so that you're genuinely listening, I think is one of the most powerful things. We can go through these quizzes if the parents are interested in the quizzes and the strengths, like figuring out my kids' strengths. And that's a structured way of doing it. But if you're not going to do that, for example, but you want to start working on strengths-based parenting, how would that look in practice?
People have started to hear about RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, but a lot of people haven't heard about the opposite, which people with RSD also have, which is called recognition responsive euphoria. And this is this sense of absolute joy and outsized emotional delight when you get told that you're doing something right, or that somebody says, thank you, that was really helpful. And I think this is why so many people with ADHD end up on stages, because at the end of it, you get a nice big round of applause and everybody goes, oh, that's nice, I like that. So there is a lot of ways that you can kind of tap into that. So it means that, for example, if you wanted a child to do something like the washing up, and if you say to them, oh, I can't believe you haven't helped with the washing up, like this washing up needs doing, come on, then that's kind of projecting this sense of guilt, and they're going to feel guilty and rubbish and recoil. Whereas if you said something like, is there any chance that you might be able to give me a hand with the washing up? That'd be amazing. And then typically one of them will come through, yeah, sure. Oh, thanks so much. That's really helpful. It's really kind of you to help me with that. That was a kind thing to do. Or that was really good leadership when you were with that group of friends and, they were all wanting to go and do something a bit dodgy, and you kind of managed to negotiate something else. So it's about helping them and yourself as a parent as well to recognize, well, what's the strength that I used then? And how can I make the most of the strengths that I have? And so, for example, my daughter and I, we have different strengths. And my strength was always, one of the ones that came top for me was always kindness. And I remember thinking, kindness, that's a bit of a rubbish strength. I'd like leadership or something a bit more feisty. But no, kindness. And as it turns out, kindness is another one like curiosity that generally helps with well-being, because if you're kind to other, your cortisol levels go down. It's good for inflammation. There's all sorts of health benefits of being kind, or even seeing somebody else being kind are actually good for your nervous system. So I was always very kind, and she would say, Mum, could you help me with this thing? And I would say, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And I would drop everything I was doing and go and help her, and then go back to what I was doing and think, oh, where was I? Oh God. And then I would get a bit stressed because I was trying to pick up on, what I'd been doing before. And when, I'd say, Katie, is there any chance you could help me with something? And she'd go, absolutely no problem. I'll do it as soon as I finish this other thing. When we compared our strengths, my top strength was kindness, her top strength was perseverance. I went,
how interesting.
So it wasn't that she wasn't being kind. It was just that her top strength is perseverance. So her thing would be, I'll finish what I'm doing and then I'll come and help you. Whereas mine was, I'll help you. Drop everything. And so there's an interesting thing where if you know what your strengths are and you know the strengths of the other people in your family, then you can understand a bit more why they might prioritize something else instead of the thing that you might prioritize, which gives you insight and more understanding. And then the other thing is that when you understand what other people's strengths are, like, for example, if I'm struggling with something that's perseverance related, I'll go, Katie, when you get a minute, could you help me with my perseverance thing?
Yes, and that gives her a role. It helps her matter. And I want to mention the washing up. It's so funny that you talk about that, because that's one of those things that bugs a lot of parents. And I've switched the way that we talk in the household to, I never say, help, could you help me? Because that assumes it's my job. So I now say, teamwork. So who in the team's going to do this? Who's going to do that? And then at the end, I say, great teamwork. Thanks for that. And my daughter was washing up the other day, and we were all like, my husband's drying up, I'm wiping down the counters. She did everything and then left the one pan that was really, really, scabby and horrible, soaking. And later on, he said, I noticed you didn't bother doing that. And I said, shush. Let's not focus on that right now, because we're making so much progress. Should we do that another time? Like next time I'll go, oh, by the way, the pan. But I just think it's one of those things where you sort of have to pick your battles. And the fact that she is getting up, washing things up, this was not something she wanted to do in the past. And she's feeling part of a team, big win, right?
Yeah.
So don't focus on the little
I think that's so much. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on, because as soon as you focus on the thing that went wrong, then particularly in a neurodivergent mind, it's like everything else is discounted, everything else is dropped.
Everything.
And all the whole focus is on the negative. And I was actually speaking with my daughter this weekend, and I said, oh, what do you think are the things that make a big difference? And she said, with somebody who has ADHD, just because they haven't done a thing, just because they haven't put something away, it doesn't mean that they don't care. They might just have forgotten. So if you say, Katie, could you come put this stuff away? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. And then she'd be embroiled in something else. And then my husband would go, Katie, could you just come put, and, oh, yes, yeah, absolutely. And so it was never a, no, I won't, or a deliberate, no, I'm not going to. It was more like I've, completely forgot all about it, or I didn't even see it because it wasn't on my radar. And if you start telling people off for it, they're making it out that they're doing it deliberately. It can just make them feel really, really guilty. And then that triggers the RSD and the avoidant thing. And they don't feel safe. They feel attacked. And when we don't feel safe and we feel attacked, then our cortisol levels go up and we go into kind of fight or flight. And then we can't really engage with people in a normal, healthy way. And that's, again, it's really common in families.
Yeah, and my daughter used to just say, no, I don't want to do that. And I realized that actually by giving her a choice of, so which one of these jobs would you like to do? You're in the
Brilliant.
team. Which pick a job? I'm not going to tell you which one. All those techniques for actually managing that need to feel like they matter, but at the same time that they actually have some control can be incredibly empowering. So let's talk about the way that brain health works, because I know that you picked out that in Davos, they're now talking a lot more about brain health and its importance in the workplace, its importance in our lives. And I know that you were saying that one of the big problems we've got is that we've only got one brain and we've been segmenting it. Like, this is mental health, this is, your performance, but it's all one of a piece. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So brain health is quite a new concept in the UK. They've been doing a lot of research into it, particularly in America for a long time. And in other countries around Europe, there has been more a focus on brain health. It hasn't been the case in the UK. And so when we think about brain health, what we're talking about is a kind of umbrella term that includes mental health.
So on a day-to-day basis, I'm running my household and, I get overwhelmed. I feel a lot of burnout. What are the things that I can do as a parent to manage I'm going out to work, for example, or how can I manage things better in a way that will help my brain to cope?
So for a parent, and I work a lot with parents in the workplace, and particularly mums hitting that kind of midlife point where we have massive brain changes. We know now that our brain changes massively. They change during menstruation, they change in pregnancy, they change in menopause. Our brains are changing a lot, particularly mums, dads change too, but more mums. And so we suddenly have times when our brains are less able to cope. So, for example, when we hit perimenopause in our early 40s, typically, our brains are actually using less energy, so they have less energy to get things done, which is why we see a lot more brain fog. And brain fog is tricky and can make you feel overwhelmed because you're trying to juggle so many things, and so you get this sense of massive overwhelm. But if you do a few things that are kind of scaffolding for your brain, then your brain is better able to use the resources it has. So, for example, we know if we sleep well, our brains will make better decisions and be less anxious. If we've slept badly, then we're more likely to be anxious in the morning and feel more overwhelmed. We're less able to focus. Our decisions are poorer. So, trying to optimize sleep, for example, is really, really important. And so a lot of people go to bed with a mobile phone and then they wake up with a mobile phone and they're scrolling a lot. And so we're kind of training our brains to be distracted, and our brains are changing all the time. It's it's an organ, but it behaves more like a muscle, and it's changing all the time. And you can make it weaker and more distracted and more anxious, or you can make it stronger and more focused and more confident, depending on what you do. People think that multitasking is a great idea, so they try and do multitasking. Women in particular think, oh, well, I'm much better at multitasking because I'm a woman. And so they have this
Nobody
sense
is.
that women are better at multitasking. No, exactly. women are not better at multitasking. They do it more, but they're no better at it. No.
That multitasking is you're constantly task switching. So when people talk about multitasking, they're thinking you're doing two tasks at the same time, but actually what you're doing is your brain's having to constantly switch between things, which is exhausting.
Exactly. So the research shows that if you're trying to multitask, it takes you longer to do the task, you make more errors and you get more stressed. So you feel more burnt out. And we see workplaces still saying we want people who are good at multitasking. And so part of my job is about saying to workplaces, okay, you need to make your workplace more brain friendly and stop asking people to do multitasking and start training them to be better at single tasking and then effectively task switching with a brain break in between. So your brain can recover for 5 minutes and then you can do the next thing without feeling overwhelmed, and turning off notifications and not being expected to be constantly answering emails and being distracted, because people need time to just focus, especially if they've got a deep thinking task. You need, and ideally it's a different space than the space where you're doing group work. So different spaces can really help, a different space for focused work compared to the space where you're all together and you're collaborating. It just helps your brain to get into a different mode of action and reduces the stress.
Yes. I tell you what, I've really come to understand, because I grew up in chaos and we didn't have any routines and nothing to speak of. And it's only as I've sort of gone on through life that I've got more and more interested in it. And I have realized the unbelievably powerful support of habit and having habits that stop you having to constantly think about things. I think what we've got now is we've got a society where anything could happen at any time. And that can be more interesting for some people, because some people find routine very, very boring. But I think most people rely much more than they realize on habit. And that if you can put in place some very, very, like I say, on a Saturday, we strip our beds. Everyone just strip your beds and we'll put some new bed linen on. Let's just do it on a Saturday. We don't have to think. We know that that's the day that happens. And otherwise we don't know. And then it's much more stressful for our brains. And when you do try and change your environmental things, like when I come back from a holiday and I don't have my exercise in place and I don't have, I've got to get the kids back to school and nothing is consistent, it's so, so stressful. So that's me rambling. What are your thoughts about habit?
No, I absolutely agree. If you think about your brain can only cope with so many things at once. And if you're trying to think about what am I going to do next, and then what am I going to do, and then what am I going to, and then I need to do this, and then I've got to, oh gosh, I've got to do that as well, then there's less capacity for it to focus on the things that you really need to do or you really want to do. And so anything that you can do to kind of offload some of that cognitive load is really helpful. So decision making, for example, it's like a muscle that gets tired. Your decision making capacity goes down, like it's a tired muscle.
Yes.
It's really fascinating. And so if you're going to make some important decisions, do them early before your decision-making capacity has worn down. Don't be making big decisions last thing on a Friday, because that's a mad thing to do and you'll make poorer decisions. Those things like having a routine or having your clothes laid out the night before. And if I've laid my clothes out the night before and I can just put them on, that's one less thing to focus on.
Yes.
And I remember hearing Mark Zuckerberg did that when he was building Facebook. And I thought, he just had all of his T-shirts and all of his jeans and they were all the same. And he wore the same thing every day, just so that he didn't have to make a decision about what he was going to put on. And I thought, okay, I don't agree with everything that Mark Zuckerberg does, but that it makes sense to have things that you don't have to think about. So if you can remove as many of the things as possible that like
the routine things that happen regularly.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, brilliant idea. Yeah.
But I also think that when we do that, we need to actually not just fill it with more stuff. We need to say, okay, I've removed that. So now I get a little bit of time to just like wonder and think. I looked at my husband the other day who was making a coffee. And when I go to the coffee machine, I put the coffee machine on and then I go and I unpack the dishwasher or, I'm like packing extra things in. And he just stands there watching the coffee machine. And I just think he's the one who's got it right. I mean, I don't know who's going to unpack that dishwasher, but maybe I need to push that onto someone else. But we need to try and find space in our, don't you think? I think we need to find space in our day where we literally just look out of the window and like let our brain decompress. If you were going to advise somebody about it, that space for your brain to just kind of calm down, what are the things that you might advise?
There's a new area of research into something called attention restoration theory, and it's about how you do exactly that. How do you restore your attention, which has got worn down? How do you restore your focus, which has got frazzled when you're trying to do things? And there's some really interesting research that shows that, for example, when you go out and you spend even just a few minutes, even 20 minutes in nature, when you go for a brief walk, or you take your attention away from the focus activity and into a space where your attention is more diffuse, it's spread out over, looking at different things around you, that it enables you to kind of restore your ability to focus much, much better, so that when you come back, your attention will be much, much better able to focus on the thing that you wanted to focus on. And so I think that I really like that idea, and I like that as a strategy. And they found that with children with ADHD, that 20-minute time in nature was the equivalent to a Ritalin, which I thought was very interesting.
Wow, really?
Mm.
That's interesting. I need to kick my daughter out and make her go on more dog walks. Clearly.
Yeah. I used to be really guilty for going out for a walk with my husband, and I'll be going, right, and then I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and I've got, I'm dealing with this, and I've got a meeting about that tomorrow. And sometimes he'd say to me, "That's a nice tree, isn't it?" look at that tree. And I'd just stop a minute and go, yeah, okay. Let's just notice the trees.
Yes. Stop thinking. A lot of parents will recognize this, that the mental tabs are open all the time. And actually, it's really important to recognize that and say, I'm not going to avoid overwhelm if I don't allow myself to just close some tabs for a time and go off and do something completely different that's restorative. Are there any other things that you think we should understand and perhaps act on when it comes to brain health?
We're really lucky now that we understand more about our brains, but still most people aren't taught about it. They don't talk about it in schools because it's quite new research, and it takes a long time for the research to get to people. Your brain is changing throughout your entire life, so it's never too late to learn new things, ever. Getting really curious about things can help you do that. So when you get curious about something, it actually helps you learn. It triggers parts of your brain that improve learning, improve engagement, improve your memory, and your brain kind of turns into a vortex for picking up more information. So if you wanted somebody to learn something that you think they might not be that interested in, or you wanted to, then looking at something that you're really curious about first will help you do that. I think as well, it's things like there's a little bit in your brain called the locus coeruleus, which means blue spot, and it's right in the middle of your brain. It's this tiny little spot that spurts out this amazing stuff called noradrenaline throughout your brain, which helps you to focus. But if you've got too much of it, it makes you anxious, and if there's not enough, you're kind of demotivated. But they recently found out that this amazing stuff actually responds to the amount of carbon dioxide in our blood. So
what?
I know, it's amazing. Isn't that fascinating? So it's chemosensitive. It responds to the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood. And so it fluctuates. And the more carbon dioxide in your, when you change your breathing, it changes the amount that's actually being produced. So, for example, and I teach this to as many people as I can because it's such an incredibly useful thing. And it's so new that most people don't know about it, that if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, then it reduces the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood. It reduces the amount of noradrenaline being produced, and it calms you down. And so I teach people, if you're about to go into an exam, if you're going to go into a stressful situation, if you're feeling a bit worried about something, you've got a big meeting, teach your children, teach everybody you know, even though they've been told in the past, oh, just breathe, and if you go, oh, I don't want to shut up, that doesn't work. And it's because people haven't been told how. They've no idea. But if you breathe in for a count of 4 and then out for a count of 8, and even if you just do it 3 or 4 times, then the noradrenaline immediately starts to reduce and you start to feel calmer. It just kicks in your parasympathetic nervous system, your kind of rest and digest, and everything calms down. Your whole nervous system starts to calm down. And it works as well if you do a kind of physiological sigh when you go, so it's like really short in breath, long out breath. And again, you can do it anywhere. Nobody knows you're doing it. It's a complete secret. You can teach it to anybody really quickly, and it genuinely makes a massive difference. And so every class I take, every workshop, every talk I do, I teach it to people. And, I ask them, who's stressed, who's feeling overwhelmed, who's feeling anxious, loads of hands. We do it 2-3 breaths. Who's feeling better? Most of the hands. So it's really impactful. And it just teaches people that this is a brain thing and you can turn it down. So I think that's a really super helpful thing. And just recognizing that there's no such thing as a typical brain. There's like no brain is normal, and then there's no brain that's abnormal. It's just people's brains are different. They're wired differently. They're good at different things. And when we understand a little bit more about our own brain and the things that can help make it function better, if we want to, we can choose to do more of those things. And we know the things that make it function worse, like staying up all night and doom scrolling and eating up processed foods and, sitting in a room all by yourself. Those things will make it function less well. So, try and do less of the things that are going to be bad for your brain. Try to do a few more odd tweaks that are going to be better for your brain. And gradually, when you start noticing that your brain is functioning better, it becomes quite motivating.
Yes, and I love the whole point being that once we start to understand that we all have strengths, and if you look at the other people in your family, quite often we will look at them and go, why aren't they doing this well? Because it's something we do well and we don't understand why they can't do it. This focuses the mind on, well, what can they do well? Maybe it's something I'm actually not very good at, and that's a good thing. That's empowering because maybe they can support me back. And I just think it's a really, really lovely switch. It's a tonal switch in the way we relate to each other, both our partners and our children, and can really enable us to have a better, sort of happier life. So brilliant. Naomi, I love what you're talking about. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, where would they come?
So I'll give you my Substack. I've only just started it, but I'm going to be posting more and more about brain health on Substack. I was very inspired by yours. I love it.
Thank you.
So I'll give you the link to my Substack, and I'm on LinkedIn a lot. Naomi Glover, you'll find me very easily on LinkedIn, and at neuroinformed.com, neuro-informed.com is my website.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Naomi. If you want to find me, as she's just said, I'm on Substack. It's kind of my new home. It's where the community is growing. So if you want to come on there, you'll find out other things I've written where I've expanded on stuff that's on the podcast. The paid subscribers get a PDF printout of top tips so that you've got a little handy guide rather than having to sort of listen to everything, but obviously listen to what helps. And I can also answer questions. So if you say, this is happening, I'm not sure which episode would help, just give me a shout and I'll tell you which episode to listen to help you sort of pick through, because there's quite a lot of material there now. And I have a website, which is www.teenagersuntangled.com. And my email address is teenagersuntangled@gmail.com. That's it for this week. Thank you so much. Big hug from me. Bye-bye.